Two American men, Richard Walker, 32 years old, and Victor Gill, 28 years old, embarked on what was meant to be a thrilling diving operation in August 1983. Tasked with a dangerous but exciting mission, they descended to a staggering depth of 422 feet, 129 meters, in the treacherous North Sea. This was supposed to be another successful day in their careers as saturation divers, but instead, it turned into an unimaginable nightmare. This is the tragic story of the Wildrake diving disaster. The Wildrake diving disaster occurred when two saturation divers, Richard Walker and Victor Gill, descended to a depth of 422 feet in the North Sea. The disaster unfolded due to a series of poor decisions, including the reduction of essential safety equipment and mismanagement. Saturation diving is a high-risk activity that involves divers staying at great depths for extended periods, breathing a mixture of helium and oxygen. This method prevents nitrogen buildup in the body, but it requires careful handling to avoid decompression sickness, or the bends. A combination of poor decision-making, malfunctioning equipment, and failure to recognize critical safety concerns led to the tragic event. The divers were left in extreme danger, which ultimately resulted in their deaths. The Wildrake incident serves as a stark reminder of the dangers inherent in deep-sea diving and the importance of safety measures in high-risk environments. When saturation divers work at extreme depths, they breathe a carefully controlled mixture of gases, primarily oxygen and helium, to avoid nitrogen buildup in their tissues. The pressure underwater is much greater than at the surface, meaning that gases are denser and are absorbed by the body. Nitrogen, a key component in air, dissolves into the body's tissues, muscles, and even bones under pressure. To prevent damage from nitrogen bubbles, divers must undergo decompression, which involves slowly ascending through stages to release the gas from their bodies. If a diver ascends too quickly, nitrogen can form bubbles, leading to severe tissue damage and potentially fatal consequences. This process requires careful timing and management of dive depth and duration. Decompression is a crucial aspect of saturation diving, and failure to manage it properly can lead to serious injuries or death. The dive management during the Wildrake disaster failed in this regard, contributing to the fatal outcome. Saturation diving, developed in the 1950s, allows divers to work at extreme depths without having to constantly ascend and descend for decompression. Instead of returning to the surface after each dive, divers remain at depth in a saturation chamber, where the pressure is maintained at the same level as the underwater environment. This allows them to avoid the buildup of excess nitrogen in their bodies, as they stay in equilibrium with the gases they breathe. The key principle behind saturation diving is that the body can only absorb so much nitrogen before it reaches equilibrium. Once this point is reached, divers can stay at depth indefinitely, provided they have adequate air, heat, food, and water. This breakthrough in diving technology allowed for deep-sea exploration and work at depths of 400 to 500 feet, though it also introduced new risks. In the case of the Wildrake disaster, these principles were ignored, leading to the tragic loss of life. The MS Wildrake was a dive support vessel designed for saturation diving, operating in the North Sea, one of the most dangerous and challenging environments for deep-sea diving. The North Sea is known for its cold temperatures, rough seas, and unpredictable weather, making it a hazardous location for divers. The Wildrake was equipped with a saturation chamber that allowed divers to stay at depth for extended periods without needing to decompress. Divers were lowered to the ocean floor in a specially designed diving bell, which was also equipped with an umbilical system for delivering air, heat, and communication. This umbilical was vital for the safety of the divers, as it provided everything they needed to survive in the harsh underwater environment. Despite the advanced technology and preparation, the Wildrake's crew and management made critical mistakes during the operation, leading to the disastrous events that followed. The conditions in the North Sea, combined with mismanagement, made the operation even more dangerous. The MS Wildrake was tasked with transporting a single anchor leg mooring system to the Thistle oil fields. To facilitate this, the dive bell had to be modified to be lowered over the side of the vessel instead of through the moon pool, a design change that introduced new risks. Additionally, the swivel connecting the lift wire to the bell was replaced with shackles, and drop weights were tied with nylon rope to prevent accidental release. Unfortunately, these modifications created a series of failures. On 2 previous occasions, drop weights had unintentionally been released, leading to fatalities. Despite these accidents, the modifications were made, and the equipment was used without proper testing. Safety procedures were not followed adequately, and management overlooked critical risks. These modifications proved to be dangerous and contributed to the disaster, highlighting the importance of maintaining strict safety standards and thorough testing in high-risk operations like saturation diving. The purpose of the operation was to transport and install the PSAL single anchor leg mooring system at the Thistle oil fields. The PSAL consisted of 3 main parts: the buoy, riser, and base. The diver's job was to connect these components to create a functional pipeline system for oil transport. The divers, Richard Walker and Victor Gill, worked at great depths to attach the riser to the base of the PSAL. The operation required precision, as the PSAL had to be carefully positioned and connected to the oil platform for the oil to be transferred to shuttle tankers. Unfortunately, during this operation, the divers were faced with numerous complications, including malfunctioning equipment, communication failures, and hazardous conditions. Despite these challenges, they continued their work. However, the unforeseen difficulties that arose during the operation contributed to the tragic events that followed, demonstrating the risks inherent in such complex underwater tasks. On August 8, 1983, during the Wildrake operation, Richard Walker noticed that the bell, which was supposed to be lowered to retrieve the riser, was sitting at an angle, and the lift line was no longer attached to it. This was a critical issue, as the bell's lift system had failed, leaving the divers reliant on the life support umbilical. Walker immediately radioed the surface to report the emergency, but without the lift line, the divers had no means of safely ascending. Miscommunication and poor decision-making on the surface led to the mistaken belief that the umbilical could serve as a backup recovery system. This was not the intended purpose of the umbilical, and using it to raise the bell caused severe damage, cutting off the vital power and heat supply. Without these essential systems, the divers were left exposed to the extreme conditions of the deep sea, significantly increasing their risk of hypothermia and death. The failure of communication and equipment management played a major role in the disaster. After the bell was disconnected from the lift line, the Wildrake crew faced difficulties locating it. The transponder, which provided the bell's location, had become detached, complicating the search. The crew of the nearby ship, Steno Welder, was dispatched to assist in recovering the bell, but their dive system was under repair. Divers from the Steno Welder eventually found the bell, but locating it was a difficult and time-consuming process. When the bell was finally located at a depth of 609 feet, the divers inside were ecstatic to see the rescue team. However, the recovery efforts were hindered by rough seas and equipment failure, delaying the rescue. The divers, now trapped without power or heat, grew frantic. Despite the best efforts of the Steno Welder divers and the Wildrake crew, the situation continued to worsen. The prolonged exposure to the cold, combined with the failed recovery attempts, significantly contributed to the tragic outcome. After 17 hours without power or heat, the divers, Richard Walker and Victor Gill, were finally raised to the surface. Despite the tireless efforts of the rescue teams, including divers from the Steno Welder, the conditions inside the bell had become too dangerous. The prolonged exposure to the cold water and lack of heat led to the inevitable. The divers died of hypothermia. The bell was finally connected to the surface saturation chamber, where Dr. Morven White, in saturation, examined the divers but confirmed their deaths. The recovery operation had taken far too long, and by the time they were brought to the surface, it was too late. The failure to address the issues promptly and the inadequate safety protocols contributed directly to the divers' deaths. This tragic event highlighted the extreme dangers of saturation diving and the importance of proper training, equipment, and management in preventing such incidents. After the disaster, investigations revealed multiple safety violations and evidence of negligence by the companies involved. The Department of Energy found that the Wildrake management had failed to properly investigate the obstruction that hindered the lift, and the entire operation was mishandled. Walker's widow and Victor Gill's family filed lawsuits against the company responsible for the divers, Infabco Diving Services. But the case was complicated by the fact that Infabco had contracted the divers through another company, Offshore Coordinators. Although the lawsuit was eventually dropped, the families received some compensation. The case highlighted the legal complexities surrounding offshore accidents, particularly when multiple parties are involved. A UK lawsuit resulted in a settlement, but the families of the deceased divers did not receive the full compensation they were due. The failure of management to take responsibility and the eventual disappearance of official records in 2000 further underscored the lack of accountability for the tragedy. If you found this video interesting, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. See you in the next video.